Driverly.com, unlimited drama series.
The espresso machine gurgled like a dying cat at 2 in the morning, and honestly, that seemed about right for my life these days. I'm Jake Morrison, 43 years old, and I make a living restoring vintage motorcycles and crafting custom metalwork in my garage workshop. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps my hands busy, while my brain processes the increasingly bizarre behavior of my wife Clara. Speaking of Clara, she was supposed to be asleep upstairs, but instead I could hear her voice drifting down from our bedroom, talking in hushed, excited tones. Probably planning another one of her gallery events, I figured. Clara runs the Morrison Contemporary Gallery downtown. Named after me, though she likes to pretend that's just a coincidence these days. No, he'll never suspect a thing, her voice carried clearly through the old house's thin walls. He's too busy playing handyman to notice what a real man feels like. I froze, wrench halfway to the machine's guts. Playing handyman? Real man? The coffee maker suddenly seemed a lot less important than whatever conversation was happening upstairs. Elliot, you make me feel so alive, Clara continued, her voice taking on that breathy quality I hadn't heard directed at me in about 2 years. Jake's so predictable, so small-minded. He doesn't understand art, doesn't understand passion. Elliot. That would be Elliot Vance, the self-proclaimed art influencer who'd been hanging around Clara's gallery like a bad smell for the past 6 months. Tall, lean, always wearing black turtlenecks, like he thought he was Steve Jobs' artistic cousin. I'd met him exactly 3 times, and each encounter had left me with the distinct impression that he viewed me as something Clara had tracked in on her shoe. He'll never know, Clara laughed softly. Tomorrow night, after the exhibition opening, your place again? I set down the wrench very carefully because my hands had developed a slight tremor. Not from fear, from rage so pure, it felt like electricity in my veins. Never know? Honey, you couldn't hide a secret from me if you buried it in concrete and threw it in the river. The next morning, Clara bounced around the kitchen like nothing had happened, chattering about the upcoming exhibition while I drank coffee that tasted like ash and watched her performance. She'd always been theatrical. It's what made her good at her job. But this was next-level acting. The Whitman piece is absolutely revolutionary, she gushed, spreading organic jam on gluten-free toast. Elliot says it's going to redefine contemporary minimalism. Elliot says, I repeated flatly. What exactly does Elliot say about everything else? Clara's hand paused for just a fraction of a second. What do you mean? I mean, the guy seems to have opinions about everything in your professional life. Does he have opinions about your personal life, too? She laughed, but it sounded forced. Don't be ridiculous, Jake. He's a critic. It's his job to have opinions. Right, his job. I nodded and went back to my coffee, already planning my next move. That afternoon, while Clara was at the gallery, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I searched through her personal belongings. I felt like a creep, but then I remembered her voice saying, he'll never suspect a thing, and my guilt evaporated pretty quickly. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just something. Evidence. Proof. A smoking gun. What I found was a second phone hidden in her jewelry box. A cheap burner phone that definitely wasn't on our family plan. The text messages were like reading a bad romance novel, if bad romance novels included detailed discussions of my sexual inadequacies and professional failures. Elliot, apparently, was not just Clara's lover, but also her therapist, life coach, and biggest fan. According to their conversations, I was holding Clara back from her true artistic potential with my blue-collar mentality and emotional unavailability. Last night was art, read one of Elliot's messages from 2 weeks ago. He'll never know what he's missing. Art. They were calling adultery art. I had to admire the pretension. It took real commitment to be that insufferably pompous about betrayal. The messages went back 4 months. 4 months of planning, scheming, and laughing at the stupid husband who was too busy playing handyman to notice his wife was getting her artistic inspiration from another man's bed. I took photos of everything with my own phone, then put the burner back exactly where I'd found it. Clara wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that I'd been underestimated my entire life. and I'd gotten very good at turning that to my advantage. The next few weeks were educational. I started paying attention, really paying attention to Clara's behavior, her schedule, her sudden interest in working late. It was amazing what you could learn when you stopped trusting and started observing. Clara had always been image obsessed, but lately she'd kicked it into overdrive. New clothes, new perfume, a sudden interest in yoga classes that apparently required her to be gone for 3 hours at a time. She'd also developed an annoying habit of taking phone calls in the bathroom with the water running. Subtle as a brick through a window, I muttered, watching her disappear upstairs with her phone for the fourth time that evening. My friend Ray owns a boxing gym downtown, and I'd started spending more time there, partly to blow off steam and partly because Ray gives excellent advice about handling difficult people. Ray's been married 4 times, so he's got experience with relationship drama. You sure about this? Ray asked, holding the heavy bag while I worked out my frustrations. I mean, you got proof, but what are you going to do with it? I'm still working on that part, I admitted, throwing a particularly vicious right hook. But whatever I do, it's going to be memorable. Ray grinned. That's what I like to hear. Just remember, revenge is a dish best served public. The opportunity for public service came sooner than expected. Our daughter Becca was having her senior art show at the community college, and both Clara and I had promised to attend. It was supposed to be a family event, a celebration of our daughter's talent and hard work. Instead, it turned into the most spectacular public humiliation of my life. Clara showed up already tipsy, which wasn't unusual for her at social events. What was unusual was Elliot's presence. Apparently, he'd decided to support young artists by attending a community college art show. How noble of him. I watched them try to pretend they barely knew each other, exchanging meaningful glances across the crowded gallery space while discussing the bold artistic choices of 20-year-old students. Clara kept touching her hair and laughing too loudly at Elliot's comments about emerging talent and raw creative energy. It was nauseating. The breaking point came when I overheard Clara telling a group of parents about her gallery's upcoming exhibition. She was in full performance mode, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass when Mrs. Henderson from down the street asked about my work. "Oh, Jake's hobby?" Clara waved dismissively. "He tinkers with old motorcycles. It's very practical." Hobby. 15 years of building a successful restoration business. And she called it a hobby. "Actually," I said, stepping into the conversation, "I'm a professional metalworker and motorcycle restoration specialist. I've been commissioned by 3 museums and have pieces in private collections across the state." Clara's face flushed. "Of course, I just meant..." "You meant it's not real art like what Elliot here appreciates?" I continued smoothly. "Right, Elliot. You're the expert on what constitutes legitimate artistic expression." Elliot looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. I think all forms of creative expression have value." "How generous of you," I smiled. Clara's lucky to have such an understanding friend. The conversation died an awkward death, but I wasn't done, not even close. An hour later, after too much wine and too much of watching Clara and Elliot's pathetic attempts at discretion, I'd had enough. They were standing by the refreshment table, Clara giggling at something Elliot had whispered in her ear, when I approached with a fresh drink in hand. "Toast time," I announced loudly enough to get everyone's attention. "I'd like to say something about modern love and artistic inspiration." Clara's face went white. "Jake, what are you—" "To modern love," I continued, raising my glass high. "May it be as honest as tonight's art and last, as long as the free wine." A few people chuckled nervously. Clara grabbed my arm. "Stop it," she hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I looked around at the crowd of parents, students, and faculty, who were now all watching our little drama unfold. Or am I just finally being honest about what everyone already knows? That's when Clara snapped. "Fine," she shouted, her voice carrying across the entire gallery. "Yes, we're sleeping together. Elliot and I are having an affair. And yes, he's better than you at everything that matters. He understands art, he understands passion, and he understands me. Now get out. The silence that followed was deafening. Becca stood frozen by her sculpture display, tears streaming down her face. Parents exchanged shocked glances. Students pulled out their phones to record what was clearly going to be the most talked about moment of the semester. I set down my wine glass very carefully and looked around the room at all the faces staring at us. Friends, neighbors, acquaintances, strangers. Then I looked at Clara, who was breathing hard and glaring at me like this was somehow my fault. Well, I said quietly, I guess that settles that. I walked out with as much dignity as I could muster, leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage, my reputation, and my daughter's art show. But as I drove home through the dark streets, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what Claire and Elliot were about to lose. The aftermath of Becca's art show was swift and brutal. By the next morning, half the town knew about Clara's dramatic confession. The other half found out by noon, thanks to social media and the gossip network that operates faster than fiber optic internet in small cities. Clara tried damage control, spinning the story as a moment of emotional honesty brought on by stress and wine. Elliot, meanwhile, had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor and was avoiding public appearances. Me? I became the town's official object of pity. Everywhere I went, people gave me those sad, sympathetic looks, usually reserved for injured puppies. The grocery store clerk patted my hand while ringing up my beer. My barber offered unsolicited advice about getting back out there. Mrs. Dorsey from next door brought over a casserole and 45 minutes of commentary about what young people think is acceptable these days. Mark my words, Mrs. Dorsey said, settling her considerable bulk into my kitchen chair. That man will break her heart. These art types always do. Too much ego, not enough substance. Mrs. Dorsey was 73 years old and had been married to the same man for 52 years. She also knew everything about everyone in our neighborhood and had opinions about all of it. Most people found her exhausting. I was starting to find her useful. You think so? I asked, refilling her coffee cup. Oh, absolutely. I've seen his type before. All flash, no cash. You mark my words. He's using her for something. Men like that don't leave their wives for women like Clara, unless there's something in it for them. Interesting. What do you mean, women like Clara? Mrs. Dorsey leaned forward conspiratorially. Well, she's not exactly young anymore, is she? And she's got that desperate quality about her lately. Like she's trying too hard to prove something. I filed that observation away for future reference. The next phase of my education involved surveillance, which sounds dramatic but really just meant paying attention to patterns. Claire had moved out of our house and into a downtown apartment, claiming she needed space to think. What she actually needed was space to conduct her affair without worrying about me walking in on them. I started spending more time downtown, ostensibly running errands, but actually learning Claire and Elliot's routines. They weren't particularly careful. Why would they be? As far as they knew, I was just the heartbroken husband, probably drinking myself into oblivion and feeling sorry for myself. They met for coffee every Tuesday at the pretentious place that charged $8 for drinks, with names like Mindful Morning Meditation Blend. They had lunch every Friday at the bistro next to Clara's gallery. And every Wednesday evening, Elliot's car was parked behind Clara's building for exactly 3 hours. Creatures of habit, both of them. That was going to make things so much easier. The real breakthrough came when I started researching Elliot's background. According to his social media presence and the bio on his website, he was a respected art critic with connections to galleries in New York and Los Angeles. He'd supposedly studied at prestigious institutions and had his writing published in important journals. According to public records and a few carefully placed phone calls, Elliot Vance was a fraud. His prestigious education consisted of 2 semesters at a community college in Ohio. His published writing was mostly unpaid blog posts and a few articles in magazines that folded within 6 months of publication. His connections to major galleries seemed to consist mainly of being on their mailing lists. But the most interesting discovery was Elliot's financial situation. The man was broke. Not just low-income broke, but seriously, desperately about to lose everything broke. He owed money to landlords, creditors, and at least 3 different credit card companies. His fancy car was leased and 2 months behind on payments. His trendy downtown loft was actually a sublet that he couldn't afford. Elliot wasn't having an affair with Clara because he was swept away by passion. He was having an affair with Clara because she represented financial stability and social connections he desperately needed. This information was like finding buried treasure, except better because I was going to use it to destroy 2 people instead of just getting rich. I spent the next week planning. The plan had to be perfect, not just effective, but poetic. Ray had been right about revenge being best served public, but I wanted to add my own twist. It was going to be educational, too.
187 messages to your gym partner? She's just a friend! Don't send photos like—
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
The centerpiece of Clara's upcoming exhibition was a piece called Absolute, a completely white canvas that was supposed to represent the infinite possibility of unexpressed potential. It was pretentious garbage, but it was also worth about $1 million and was on loan from a private collector who took his art very seriously. Clara hated the piece. I knew this because I'd heard her complaining about it to Elliot during one of their coffee dates. She thought it was overrated, overhyped, and representative of everything wrong with the contemporary art world. But she had to display it because her gallery's reputation depended on maintaining relationships with important collectors. That gave me an idea. A wonderful, terrible, absolutely perfect idea. I spent 3 days crafting the perfect letter, supposedly from a famous art critic who was planning to review Clara's exhibition. The letter praised her bold, curatorial vision and suggested that she consider completing the dialogue, that the Absolute piece had started by adding her own artistic statement to it. True artistic courage, the letter read, requires the willingness to risk everything for authentic expression. The Absolute piece begs for completion, for someone brave enough to give voice to its silent potential. It was exactly the kind of pretentious, pseudo-intellectual garbage that Clara and Elliot ate up with a spoon. And because it played into Clara's secret resentment of the piece and her desperate need for professional validation, I knew she'd take the bait. I mailed the letter on a Thursday. By Saturday, Clara had broken into her own gallery after hours and spray-painted "Emptiness is trash" across the $1 million canvas in bold black letters. The security cameras caught everything. Monday morning brought chaos to the Morrison Contemporary Gallery, and I had a front row seat from the coffee shop across the street. I'd positioned myself at a window table with a clear view of the gallery entrance, ostensibly reading the newspaper, but actually watching the greatest show on earth unfold. The first sign of trouble was the police car that pulled up at 8:47 a.m. Then came the collector's insurance investigator, followed by a very angry man in an expensive suit, who I assumed was either a lawyer or the collector himself. Clara arrived at 9:15, took one look at the crowd gathered outside her gallery, and literally stumbled backward off the curb. By noon, the story was all over local news. The local gallery director vandalizes $1 million artwork was trending on social media, complete with security camera footage of Clara sneaking into her own gallery with a can of spray paint. Clara's explanation, that she was making an artistic statement about the commodification of art, convinced exactly no one. The collector was suing for damages. The gallery's board was meeting for an emergency session. And Elliot, according to Mrs. Dorsey, who'd seen him loading boxes into his car, was apparently moving out of his downtown loft in a hurry. "Rats fleeing a sinking ship," Mrs. Dorsey observed when she called to give me the update. "That man's nowhere to be found when your wife needs him most." Actually, I knew exactly where Elliot was. He was at Ray's boxing gym of all places, apparently trying to work off his stress with a punching bag. Ray had called to let me know, and I decided it was time for a face-to-face conversation. I found Elliot in the gym's back room, sweating through an expensive workout outfit and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. He was alone, which was perfect for what I had in mind. "Elliot," I said, walking into the room and closing the door behind me. "Fancy meeting you here." He spun around, and I was pleased to see genuine fear flash across his face. "Jake, I I was just working out your guilt, I suggested. Or maybe planning your exit strategy. I don't know what you mean. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. Sure you do. Claire's career's over, and the cops are asking questions about insurance fraud, and you're packing up your stuff faster than a traveling salesman. That's what we call cutting your losses. Elliot straightened up, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. Clara made her own choices. I can't be responsible for manipulating a desperate woman into destroying her career for your entertainment, I interrupted. Yeah, that would be a tough thing to take responsibility for. You don't understand the art world, Elliot said, falling back on his usual pretentious defense. Clara was making a fool of herself because you convinced her that vandalism was artistic expression, I cut him off. Just like you convinced her that adultery was passion and that I was too stupid to figure out what was going on. I took a step closer and Elliot backed up against the wall. Here's what I understand, Elliot. I understand that you're broke, desperate, and about as artistic as a used car salesman. I understand that you saw my wife as a meal ticket and a stepping stone, and you played her insecurities like a violin. That's not... I also understand, I continued, taking another step closer, that you're about to disappear from this town, like you never existed, because staying here would mean facing the consequences of what you've done. And we both know you don't have the backbone for that. Elliot's face was pale now, sweat beading on his forehead. What do you want? I want you gone, I said simply. Tonight. I want you to pack up whatever's left of your pathetic life and get out of my town. And if I ever see you again, if I ever hear that you're spreading lies about what happened here, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. You can't threaten me, I slapped him. Not hard enough to do real damage, but hard enough to snap his head back and make my point clear. That wasn't a threat, Elliot. That was a promise. He stared at me, holding his cheek, and I could see the exact moment when he decided that discretion was indeed the better part of valor. Fine, he whispered. I'll go. Smart choice, son, I said, turning to leave. Oh, and Elliot, when Clara calls looking for comfort and support in her time of need, do me a favor and don't answer the phone. She's going to need to learn what it feels like to be abandoned by someone she trusted. I walked out of the gym feeling better than I had in months. Phase 1 of my revenge was complete. Clara's career was destroyed, her lover was fleeing town, and her reputation was in ruins. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. The next morning brought news that Clara had been officially fired from her position at the gallery and was facing a civil lawsuit that would likely bankrupt her. She'd also been arrested on charges of vandalism and destruction of property, though she'd been released on bail. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That afternoon, she called me for the first time since the art show disaster. Jake, she said, and her voice sounded small and broken. I need help. Do you now? I kept my tone neutral, professional. What kind of help? Legal help, financial help. I made a mistake, Jake. A terrible mistake. And now everything's falling apart. What about Elliot? I asked. Can't he help you? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. He's gone, she finally whispered. He left town yesterday. He won't return my calls. Huh, I said as if this was surprising news. That's unfortunate timing. Jake, please, I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything, but what you need, I interrupted, is to face the consequences of your choices. You made this mess, Clara. You destroyed our marriage, humiliated our daughter, and wrecked your career all for a man who abandoned you the moment things got difficult. That's not my problem to solve. But I'm your wife. No, I said firmly. You were my wife. Now you're just someone I used to know who made very poor decisions. Good luck with the lawsuit, Clara. I hope it works out for you. I hung up and turned off my phone. Clara had wanted excitement, passion, and artistic inspiration. Well, she'd gotten all three, just not in the way she'd expected. But my masterpiece wasn't finished yet. There was still one more act to perform. 2 weeks later, the Morrison Contemporary Gallery held its reopening event. The new management had decided to rebrand the space as a community art center, focusing on local artists and accessible art, rather than pretentious million-dollar pieces. It was, they announced, a return to the gallery's original mission of supporting emerging talent. The irony was delicious. I'd been invited to the reopening, partly because my name was still on the building and partly because the new director had seen some of my metalwork and wanted to discuss a possible exhibition. I accepted the invitation with enthusiasm. The evening of the reopening, I arrived fashionably late, dressed in my best suit and carrying a small gift for the new management. The gallery was packed with the same crowd that had witnessed Clara's meltdown at Becca's art show, plus a healthy selection of local artists, community leaders, and curious onlookers. Clara was there too, looking haggard and desperate. She'd apparently decided that showing up to her former workplace's reopening was a good idea, though judging by the way people were avoiding her, the community disagreed. I made my way through the crowd, accepting condolences and sympathy with gracious dignity, until I reached the small stage that had been set up for speeches. The new director was just finishing his remarks about new beginnings and community support when I stepped up to the microphone. "Excuse me," I said, and the room gradually quieted. "I'd like to say a few words, if I may." The director looked surprised but stepped aside. I smiled at the crowd, recognizing faces throughout the room, neighbors, friends, acquaintances, and enemies. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began. "This gallery has been an important part of our community for 15 years, and I'm grateful to see it continuing under new management." Polite applause. I waited for it to die down. "I'd also like to take this opportunity to share something with all of you. Something about truth, consequences, and the importance of understanding people before you underestimate them." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the gallery's sound system. The first thing that played was a recording of Clara's voice from that night 2 months ago. He'll never suspect a thing. He's too busy playing handyman to notice what a real man feels like. The crowd stirred uneasily. Clara's face went white. "That's my wife," I announced cheerfully. "Or rather, my ex-wife, talking to her lover about how stupid I am. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes they surprise you." I clicked to the next recording. Clara and Elliot planning the vandalism of the absolute painting, with Elliot encouraging her to make a statement and show the art world what real courage looks like. "And here's the man who convinced my wife to destroy her career for art," I continued. "The same man who abandoned her the moment the consequences became real." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Clara tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but people weren't moving aside for her. "But the best part," I said, clicking to my final surprise, "is this email I received yesterday." On the screen behind me, projected for everyone to see, was an email from Elliot to Clara sent just that morning. In it, he explained that he was now living in California, working at a coffee shop, and had learned so much from their artistic journey together. He also mentioned that he'd sold his story about the crazy gallery director to a blogger who was writing an article about art world scandals. "Apparently," I said, reading directly from the email, "our story is going to be featured in an article called 'When Art Imitates Life, a Case Study in Professional Self-Destruction.' Isn't that nice? Elliot's going to make money off Clara's humiliation." The crowd erupted. People were shouting, pointing, pulling out their phones to record what was clearly going to be the most talked about event of the year. Clara was crying, trying to push through the crowd, but now people were actively blocking her path, demanding explanations. I unplugged my phone and stepped back from the microphone, watching the chaos unfold with deep satisfaction. This was better than any revenge I could have imagined. Clara publicly exposed, humiliated, and abandoned, while I stood revealed not as the stupid, oblivious husband, but as the patient, intelligent man who had orchestrated the perfect comeuppance. Security tried to restore order, but it was too late. The story was already spreading through social media, the recordings were being shared, and Clara's reputation was being destroyed in real time by hundreds of witnesses. I made my way toward the exit, stopping only when Mrs. Dorsey grabbed my arm. "Jake Morrison," she said, her eyes bright with admiration. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." I smiled and patted her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Dorsey. I couldn't have done it without your help." Outside the gallery, I could hear sirens approaching, probably called by someone who thought the crowd was getting out of hand. I walked slowly to my truck, taking my time, savoring the moment. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about Clara and Elliot and the choices that had led them to this moment. They'd wanted drama, passion, and excitement. They'd wanted to feel superior to the boring, predictable husband who was too stupid to see what was happening right under his nose. Well, they'd gotten everything they'd asked for. The drama was spectacular. The passion had burned out exactly as predicted, and the excitement would last for years in the form of legal proceedings, financial ruin, and social exile. As for me, I was going home to my workshop, where I had 3 restoration projects waiting and a commission for a sculpture that would pay more than Clara made in 6 months at the gallery. They'd called me small-minded, predictable, and unartistic. But looking back at the masterpiece of destruction I'd just unveiled, I had to disagree. I'd created something beautiful tonight, something that would be remembered, discussed, and admired for years to come. Something that perfectly captured the consequences of betrayal, the price of arrogance, and the danger of underestimating people. They'd wanted a spectacle. I'd given them a masterpiece,